Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for watching. Just wanted to start today and say that Eric and I read most, if not all, of the comments you guys put below the videos, and the appreciative ones and the thankful ones mean a lot to us. We find it, a privilege to chat with you about the weather every morning. So if you're finding it informative or getting value out of it, that means a lot to us. And then the constructive comments as well, or some of the feedback ones, we read those too. If there's comments about, microphone or the sound or the playback of one of the maps, we try to adjust and edit those. So keep them coming. We appreciate them, and it means a lot to us. As for the weather piece, chatting that here this morning, there's not terribly too much to look at, just looking at the radar map as of this morning, Thursday, May 8th here. Some showers and precipitation over Missouri, southern Illinois. We've kind of seen this upper level low leave the Four Corners where it's been active over the southwest and push across maybe more of the central portion of the country, now getting in even to the eastern portion of the country with a severe threat today. So we'll talk about that kind of to start the video. That'll translate more into this kind of transitionary period in the pattern I think we're in now, with the southeast getting a bit more precipitation. We need the rains in Florida, more of that because of the drought we've seen there. But then also looking at when are we finally going to get some Midwest rain back into the picture. We've seen now 3-4 days go by without even a drop of precipitation in some areas in the Midwest. I think that's going to be changing soon. And then we're going to look, we have a brand new NMME forecast that is the National Multi-Model Ensemble for the Summer Outlook. And that had a big switch from its last run in April here in early May. So I want to talk about that and what that means and kind of compare that to what we're seeing in some of the sea surface temperatures and what we saw from the ECMWF. So a lot in this video. I'll try to get through it quickly here. If we jump back and just look at the upper level jet stream map, as we often do to start, we see an interesting pattern unfolding, and we actually have a term for this meteorologically. We see the polar branch of the jet stream well up here into Canada, where it's been for much of late April and early May, but it's diving back down here into the southern piece that's really wrapping up into a trough almost beneath this ridge here over Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And you can see this trough here developing underneath it across the southern U.S. This is what we call the development of a Rex block in meteorology. And those tend to reflect a lack of momentum in the atmosphere. And that's something we've talked about quite a bit here in early May. So it's not a surprise to see that here. In fact, if you see that high, this ridge over low pattern, it's pretty textbook. And just pulling up that textbook pattern here, this is a Rex block more centered over the western U.S. But you can see that high over low pattern here lining up nicely. And like I said, when these patterns develop, we tend to get locked in the same pattern for a number of days, even kind of weeks on end at times. Now, that's not quite the situation here because while I just showed you that jet stream level flow over North America, if we look over the Pacific, look at the momentum coming out of the North Pacific into the picture here. You can just see that this is an impressive stream here from the jet stream, and that is going to be our weather maker going into next week. And there's some pivot points on that we'll have to talk about as we get into this video. Now, as far as just looking at the last 72 hours of precipitation, areas that got quite a bit and then some areas that missed out, it's kind of curious. You can almost draw a line here, say for northeastern Kansas, from portions of northeastern Colorado, where the northeastern tip of the state has missed out on some of this rainfall, all the way through northern Alabama near Huntsville. Below that, we've seen an inch plus, well over an inch in some locations. We talked about the southern Louisiana rains earlier this week. And if we really pull this back over the last 14 days, that line shows up nicely over the last 2 weeks, where we've seen a lot of the heavier rain here in through the southern plains and into the southeast. This is going to be shifting east here as we go into the next few days. We'll talk about that in a second. To the north of that, we've been talking about the Midwest dry stretch that's picked up here of late. We can even see that looking over the past 14 days, let alone over the past 3 days. And this really extends over the last 4 days as well. And if we just jump ahead in the forecast and look at the 7-day precipitation forecast, this is from the National Weather Service, the WPC. I mentioned that southeast focus. There's where that heavy rain is shifting over Georgia, Alabama, Florida, finally, where their precipitation deficits are right now in 2025 sitting 3, 4, or 5 inches below where they're typically at year to date. Well, it's almost like what you would order to get out of the drought that they're in Florida in terms of the flash drought situation there. So quite a bit of precipitation coming through the southeast. This extends up into the Carolinas toward New England as well. I want to jump over and pull up the forecast just for the next few days to get an idea of where that cutoff low is going to be influencing thunderstorms. Let's come over here and we'll pull up the 3-kilometer NAM here. So that cutoff low, we talked about that Rex block, that high over low pattern here is positioned somewhere kind of over Oklahoma or Missouri here, prompting those showers that we just saw here this morning. I'll make this valid as about 6 a.m. near the recording of this video. See those showers here coming up nicely on the 3-kilometer NAM, just like we saw on radar. As we get into lunchtime today, pretty quiet still, just like the radar presentation showed us a bit ago. As we go through the day, thunderstorms and showers likely to develop here over the Tennessee valleys and the Ohio River valleys. If I pull up the simulated radar, you'll see that a little bit better here. Let's bring this up toward just after lunchtime, 3 p.m. See underneath that cutoff low, some showers and storms developing, some here in southern Georgia. As we go through dinner time into 7 p.m. Central, that storm coverage picking up better here. You can see quite a few more areas, even in western North Carolina here, parts of central and eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, even trying to get over into the Ohio River Valley as well, and some scattered storms in South Texas and into Florida as well. This is through the evening period. See those shifting a bit further east in coverage across the Appalachians toward midnight before weakening into the overnight as we get into Friday, and see potential renewed intensity in the afternoon on Friday here over North Carolina and Virginia, perhaps stretching back into the Carolinas and Georgia as well. Some lingering showers and storms over the Gulf states and through Friday evening. All the while, Florida continuing to see precipitation chances over the next few days. And then there'll be this lull over the weekend. We'll talk about that in just a second, because what's happening here is this trough here that's underneath this Rex block is kind of breaking up or decoupling a bit. There's one piece here and another piece here. You can also see that wrapping up into a nice low pressure system over New England. As these kind of split up, this is going to allow this southern piece of the trough to reconsolidate here over the southeast, where it's going to bring additional precipitation chances here. So it's not just the storms over the next 48 to 72 hours prompting this higher precipitation, this heavier rain signal from the WPC. It's this reconsolidation that we'll look at in the trough in just a second here. So here's the Storm Prediction Center for today. Has the slight risk area out for a similar area where we saw those thunderstorms pick up in intensity in the evening hours. So central and eastern Tennessee, the western Carolinas, northern Alabama, and Georgia. And then we talked about southern Texas. You can see the strip here along the Rio Grande with a slight risk for severe thunderstorms today. Now I want to look above, as we often do at the beginning of these forecast videos. This is the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast from the ECMWF. You can see that ridge here in the jet stream coming back around into that low beneath it, right? That low underneath the high. There's your Rex block, classic pattern, kind of centered right over Oklahoma, southern Missouri, where we saw those showers. So nice forecast here at 7 a.m. from the ECMWF. I'm going to take this through Thursday. Not a whole lot happening, but boy, by Friday evening, you can see this trough now has consolidated, and this one over the south has begun to emerge as well as two separate pieces. And so we'll see activity in New England getting through this weekend, and then this trough down here is going to be slowly consolidating into its own entity or unit, if you will, and bringing renewed shower chances and thunderstorm chances to the southeast as we go through the weekend. You'll see that just kind of spinning down here all the way out now to Tuesday, May 13th. So we're getting into 4, 5, 6 day forecast at this point. We still have the ridge and we still have the trough beneath it. So while I talked about the potential pattern change coming out of the Pacific, this is what these Rex blocks do. They just kind of park themselves. So we're out 5 days in the forecast at this point, and we still have this high over low pattern that hasn't moved too much. Now, fortunately, for some areas here that are going to be pretty dry through this period, some areas here that are going to be pretty wet through this period, we have this energy or this momentum coming out of the Pacific and this trough over the West Coast that's going to kind of kick things out and put us into a potential chance for a new pattern here, at least getting into mid to late May. We'll have to talk about that and see what it looks like. Before we do that, I want to talk on temperatures really quickly here. Maximum temperatures here today. This is from the National Weather Service. You can see 70s here stretching through the Midwest into the Southern Plains under the influence of that trough. But there's that ridge, and you can see getting up near 90s in North Dakota here. So take this into Friday. Again, this cooler stretch of weather underneath kind of the troughing that's starting to break up here across portions of the southern U.S. and New England, showing its effects here on the temperatures just into the 70s here across the Midwest. But those 80s growing in coverage here across the northern tier of the country over toward Oregon, Idaho, the Snake River Valley, Montana, the Dakotas, now into Minnesota as well. That only increases on Saturday and then Sunday, with now 90s showing up over the Dakotas, 80s starting to push back into the Midwest. Cooler weather toward the southeast, where we have that trough still maintaining influence. Warmer weather in the northern half of the country, but now Monday, the next trough, what I showed you all the way back at the beginning of this video, starting to push into California and making its presence felt. And now I have to find my place to get in the slides here at the top of the screen. Let's go a few days further out. We'll go into Tuesday and then Wednesday. And what you're seeing here is this trough now positioning itself across the western U.S., bringing up that warmth, potentially that Gulf moisture as well, up into the central U.S. And this is setting the stage for our next chance of precipitation across the Midwest, across the geography here. Iowa, southern Minnesota, much of Wisconsin, northern Illinois, getting into Missouri, even Indiana. We're running a precipitation dry stretch at this point, let alone over the last 3 to 4 days. But even all the while this trough is sitting down here over the southeast over the next few days, this area remains dry. But we're seeing now the signs of that Gulf moisture return, right? This trough out west kind of paints a picture of a more active pattern. We jump over and look at the ECMWF forecast. Again, I'll make this valid about 7 a.m. There's those showers over Missouri, southern Illinois, kind of sneaking into Kentucky. So take this to 7 p.m. tonight. You can see those consolidating into thunderstorms here. The ECMWF, being a poor resolution model, isn't resolving those individual thunderstorms that we could get on that 3-kilometer NAM model. But the coverage here shows us that those are still likely from this forecast here. And then the southern Texas storm chance is showing up nicely there as well. Critically, Florida involved in some of this as well. So we go into Friday evening. We talked about the Carolinas, Virginia, potential severe storm chances, can see those there. And then just general showers and storm chances across the Gulf Coast, Florida as well. Now our troughs are splitting here. There's that low pressure system centered near Boston, bringing that heavier precipitation to New England. But this trough now down here making its own low pressure system. You can see that influence down here with showers and storms again along the Gulf Coast into Florida on Saturday evening. That continues on Sunday over the southeast. By Monday, this starts to move inland a bit, so you're seeing precipitation over parts of Tennessee, Alabama, up through northern Georgia into the Carolinas. Continuing into Tuesday, and then into Wednesday. And what you're seeing now is the influence of that trough now coming on shore in the west. So I'm going to take this forecast back now. I'm going to bring it all the way to Monday at 7 a.m. And you can see this low pressure system associated with this trough coming in from the Pacific, bringing precipitation to California, Oregon, parts of western and eastern Washington, even into the Sacramento Valley in California. This is pretty rare for early May here. Getting to the central coast, seeing some precipitation as well in California, potentially snow up near Lake Tahoe and the central Sierra Nevadas. Again, getting into May, that's typically their snow melt season. When we're warming up temperatures, there's less snow. We're getting some of that snow into the reservoirs in California, not necessarily snowing at this time here as we approach June. And as that low consolidates, what we're seeing here is a low pressure system developing over North Dakota. And we can see some precipitation on the backside of this. Now you're probably wondering, here's the low, probably have a cold front here, warm front here. Where's the precipitation that we typically see out ahead of these lows? Well, it's being robbed of that moisture for now. And the reason for that is what we just talked about in the forecast. We have this trough here in this low pressure system over the southeast, and it's just eating up that Gulf moisture. In fact, we can just kind of see that as I play the forecast through the early part of the week, that a lot of that Gulf moisture that could be getting surged up into the Midwest or even the northern plains is going to be falling down here, whether it's South Texas or the southeast. These troughs and low pressure systems here over the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, and I'm up in the air right now, these prevent moisture return from getting up into the central U.S. So it's not a coincidence that we see the heavy rainfall pattern here and we see dry patterns here. So I'm going to jump back here. This is that 500 millibar height pattern. I'm going to make this valid as of Sunday, May 11th, so just a few days. See that ridge over the central part of the country, bringing that warmer, drier weather to the Midwest. That continues, that trough consolidating over the southern U.S., and then the stream coming into the western U.S. that we talked about in California. Now, as that comes in, it's going to try to pull up that Gulf moisture and the warmth here. It's going to get that warmth up, but we talked about that moisture being robbed toward the southeast. But critically, that first phase comes through. We'll take a look at what that looks like on the precipitation, but we see the second, more broader long wave trough come into the western U.S. That would give time for some proper Gulf moisture to recover and get up into the Midwest or the central plains, improving the precipitation chances here. Now, we're well out into the forecast here, getting out to kind of an 8 to 10 day forecast. So can't put the exact details on this now, but this general pattern here where you have a ridge over the Northeast Pacific, we're going to come back to that. By the way, we'll bookmark that. And this trough here over the western U.S., this is a productive pattern for precipitation in the central part of the country or even the northern plains. Now, I am going to jump back to the ECMWF forecast here, and we'll take it right to that. Let's do Sunday, May 11th, like we talked about. There's that trough. We watch that come in. We notice that lack of precipitation. That's kind of where we left it. We see that southeast precipitation now moving up into the Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic. As that first system moves through, you'll see some backside precipitation here. Even if I take you back in the forecast, even got some Canadian prairie precipitation in on Tuesday. By Wednesday, we see this low consolidating over the Dakotas, precipitation mostly on the backside of that, some frontside precipitation trying to form out ahead of it in eastern Minnesota, western Wisconsin, maybe even northern Illinois in the middle of the week. Still seeing that backside precipitation, but that was not a huge precipitation maker for that same area we talked about, kind of entrenched in this drier stretch of weather here. We really have to wait until that longer wave piece sets up behind it over the western U.S. That Gulf moisture is now able to get in with this other trough leaving the scene. And we see more widespread significant precipitation from Nebraska, an area that really needs rainfall right now, eastern Kansas, parts of Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois, and maybe lacking the northern plains a bit. That's the end of the forecast here. We're out to 10 days right now. So again, these details aren't exactly clear. A shift to the north, a shift to the east, and some of this precipitation leaving out Nebraska or Kansas is not off the table, but we do have this signal of another trough moving in. I'm going to show you the AIFS forecast to get you a different opinion here. I'm going to take this again, that kind of pivot point on May 11th on Sunday here. See that southeastern precipitation. We do see that Canadian prairie precipitation in the southern third of Saskatchewan and Alberta here, getting into the northern plains here on Monday in terms of light precipitation. That's consolidating into a more proper low pressure system here over the Dakotas on Wednesday. There's that backside precipitation, kind of critically. No warm sector precipitation or storms to talk about on Wednesday until we get into Wednesday evening. We see over Minnesota, northern Iowa, maybe northern Illinois, and then that backside precipitation over the Dakotas. I will see the AIFS looks a little bit more moist, a little bit more rainfall here than the ECMWF proper. As we get into Friday and then Saturday, seeing the influence of that deeper long wave trough over the western U.S., better precipitation chances across the central U.S. and the potential Midwest as we go through the next weekend. Again, well out into the forecast here, but it is a signal. The GFS has not been performing well. It's recovered a bit, but its forecast solution now into Wednesday of next week, it has that lighter precipitation coming through on that first system. But the second system that moves through, it's quite a bit further south here. But again, right now the GFS, given that I'm all the way 10 days out in the forecast here, don't want to put too much weight into this one. It just hasn't been performing up to standard compared to the ECMWF. If you look at the 7-day outlook from the European model, this is going to look similar to that WPC forecast I showed earlier. So wet across the southeast. We continue to stay dry across the middle part of the country, going over dry in portions of the southern plains as well after all the precipitation they had. We're seeing the first influences of that trough here over Alberta and Saskatchewan, like we mentioned. It's not quite showing up here because if you remember, I talked about that low consolidating on Wednesday and then Thursday. That's out 7 days from now. It's missing it a bit in this initial forecast here. But if we take this to the 8 to 14 day outlook from the ECMWF ensemble, we can see this area filling in with precipitation here across portions of the Mid-South, portions of the Midwest, portions of the Northern Plains. Critically, the ECMWF ensemble does bring rain through Nebraska and Kansas, but not nearly as much. It's still on the drier side. So I'm going to be watching this area closely. There's some pockets in here that missed out on the Southern Plains precip that have not gotten the precip that some of the Midwest had, and there's some pretty dry areas building in here that we were hoping to get some rainfall on in May with this next kind of push with these systems here. The AIFS, the 8 to 14 day outlook here, has a similar signature. It's a bit less broad, but the AIFS is an operational model, not an ensemble, so that's to be expected. So precipitation through the northern plains into the upper Midwest, getting into the portions of the eastern Corn Belt. Kind of critically, though, watching this area here. Remember, I mentioned portions of Kansas, central Nebraska, even eastern Nebraska, northeast Colorado. Desperately needing some rain here and just not seeing it from these individual model runs, but there's enough activity that these chances will hopefully continue. Precipitation story over the next 5 days from the ECMWF ensemble. We talked about the warmth getting into the Dakotas initially, the cooler influences of that trough in the southern portions of the U.S. That starts to depart as we get into this weekend, and then next week with warmer temperatures setting up across much of the eastern 2/3 of North America, with that heat particularly maximized here in terms of an anomaly across the upper Midwest and eastern Canada. And then by 10 to 15 days, getting out into mid to late May at this point, seeing a warmer signal for much of the eastern U.S., including the western U.S. at this point. Now, I'm going to jump back and show you this map here. We're seeing this added momentum out of the Pacific, prompting something of a pattern change here. We talked about rather than a trough here over the Gulf of Alaska, which tends to promote this jet stream ridging up over Canada, we're starting to replace that with a ridge, bringing that long wave trough into the western U.S. And I think what we're seeing here out of the Pacific is a bit of renewed momentum. So you've heard us talk a lot about a lack of momentum in the atmosphere here in early May and late April. Well, where's this momentum coming from? I think we can find it a bit on some of these Hobben-Wheeler diagrams. This is from Michael Ventris, a colleague meteorologist, puts out these great velocity potential graphs. We're looking at these Hobben-Wheeler diagrams going back in time. So actually today on this map is at the bottom and going back in time as we go up the map. And we're actually looking at velocity potential along the equator where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of momentum and convection in the atmosphere. And that typically occurs in the Western Pacific or the Eastern Indian Ocean, which is a corridor in here, where we see these low velocity potentials as a proxy for convection or adding momentum to the atmosphere in this corridor here. And what we saw is plenty of momentum in March. And I know it's subtle, but we see plenty of that here. And you just notice how there's these kind of breaks in it ever since we got to April, maybe April 7th as a cutoff point. And we've just had these kind of lulls in convection or a source of momentum in the Western Pacific ever since we got into April, heading toward early May. And it's kind of this period here where we've been mentioning a lack of momentum, cutoff lows over the southern U.S., Rex blocks over the central part of the country like we're seeing develop right now. What we're noticing just in the last few days, some renewed momentum out of the Western Pacific. And if we can look at a forecast of this. If we jump over and look at just the GFS forecast, generally, if we go back in time, we can see that relative lack of momentum compared to the forecast going out to mid to late May. So what we might be seeing here is some renewed juice in the atmosphere, some more systems to talk about, less cutoff lows. I think that would be good news for the Midwest, good news for the upper Midwest, who's going to have this great dry stretch for planting, but is going to need to put rain and moisture on that crop afterwards. And we're watching this closely because if we look at the ECMWF weeklies that have come out this week, if we go from May 20th to June 20th, this is their 30-day precipitation anomaly, we see renewed precipitation chances for the Midwest, even the upper Midwest. But critically, there's this area in here I'm watching, Nebraska, maybe even western Iowa, getting into Kansas, parts of Colorado, that have missed out on precipitation that aren't seeing a strong signal here. And a little bit of my concern here is that some of the momentum that might be coming through in late May is going to push more proper low pressure systems through this area with a little bit more momentum. That's going to pull up that Gulf moisture more at an angle like this, and it's going to struggle to get back into the southern plains or get back into the central plains or far western corn belt here. We saw that at times in March when we had plenty of momentum. We had storms to talk about, but they were pushing dust storms through this area, and the storms were firing up in Arkansas or western Missouri before outbreaks were occurring, maybe in eastern Arkansas or Illinois or Indiana overnight. The precipitation was occurring here, but not here. And that concern is kind of coupled with seasonal forecasts showing drier conditions spreading from the southern plains up into the central and northern plains this summer. So when I see some of those stars aligning with the seasonal forecast, with what we're seeing in the near-term forecast, my concern grows. And so it's why I'm watching some of those areas so closely as we get precipitation into here over the next week to see where exactly that falls and what that pattern looks like. Looking at the weeklies and the temperature outlook over the next 30 days, I'll make this the same. So this is May 20th through June 20th here. See that same area with drier concerns also showing above average precipitation and, temperature anomalies over the next 30 to 40 days. Now, I mentioned the new NMME is out. I'm showing this for June, July, August now. This is the latest May update from that forecast. That is the National Multi-Model Ensemble, which combines a number of different seasonal models into one forecast. And this hasn't been an interesting shift. So while it's dry over portions of the central and southern plains, we just talked about that potential here, drier over portions of the high plains getting over into the Intermountain West, some portions of the Canadian Prairie here. This is actually a much wetter forecast than what it had in early April. And just to kind of compare, let's see if I can pull up that early April forecast. This is the April update for June, July, August from the same National Multi-Model Ensemble. You can see much wider dry swath. The contours were more magnified over portions of Nebraska, getting into Illinois, even Indiana, Michigan, all the way up into the Canadian Prairie. If I compare that to what I just showed you, see it walking back some of the dry concerns along and east of the Mississippi River, even along and east of the Missouri River at times, with more of the dry focus over portions of the high plains, maybe the southern and central plains, and certainly the northwest. If we'll get temperatures over that same time period from the May update, June, July, August, see warmer temperatures here over the western U.S. and kind of curiously the central U.S., maybe the more mild side here over the mid-south, the southern plains, maybe some initialization bias happening here with all the rainfall that we had through this quarter here. If you remember, this was the same area that we circled with those heavy rain values from just here in early May. So maybe a bit of bias here, the same way we saw some of these temperature contours come down over portions of the Ohio River Valley when they saw that rain earlier in spring. Curiously, from the NMME, similar to the ECMWF, if we look at the Northeast Pacific, slightly on the colder side here, but nothing like some of these big drought years that we've seen in the past. So without the NMME, going cold here, with the ECMWF not going cold here, my concern for, widespread drought like we saw from that April update is maybe reduced a little bit. If we jump over and look at the forecast just for July from the NMME, kind of critically shows an area of dryness here in Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, Montana, getting into the Dakotas, but critically not over a number of the ice states here, the Corn Belt, Eastern Corn Belt, even getting up into the upper Midwest, kind of just on the lower side of some of these contours here. So not as dire of a forecast from the NMME as we saw in April, maybe bringing back a little bit of those drought concerns and kind of playing into that same theme, if you will. I'm going to jump back and show you May 8th sea surface temperatures. I mentioned the Northeast Pacific here and how often and how big of a focus that is for us when we talk about drought in North America. Well, critically, the ECMWF and the NMME have not forecasted very cold waters here in the Northeast Pacific this year. And we've been trying to marry what looks like some strong drought risk from some of these seasonal models, from some of the soil moisture deficits that we've seen across portions of the country, with the fact that we just haven't seen the cold water develop here. And the reason we think and say that is because here's 1988, May 8th, huge drought year across North America. Well, certainly cold there. Well, okay, what about 2006, where we had drought over portions of the northern plains in the upper Midwest, an area of concern this year? May 8th, same date we're at today, cold in the Northeast Pacific, stretching down through Cabo. Well, what about 2011, drought year for the southern plains that in July and August started to get up into the Midwest and the Corn Belt? Cold in the Northeast Pacific, cold down through Cabo, negative PMM all the way toward Tahiti. What about 2012? Huge Corn Belt drought, portions of the Southern Plains as well, cold in the Northeast Pacific. What about throw in 2023, where we saw flash drought in June across the Central and Eastern Corn Belt? Relatively cold in the Northeast Pacific, cold through Cabo. What about 2025 in May, where we're at today? Warm in the Northeast Pacific. We do have that Cabo cold signature. So we're just not seeing the cold temperatures develop in the Northeast Pacific by mid-May, like maybe we expected or were worried about seeing going into a year that had some drought potential. Now, does this mean that drought potential is nil across North America? No. In fact, the NMME, which is warmer in this area, does bring in more widespread dry conditions in its forecast by August, September, and October. It's just critically after July, an area that we're a few week period where we happen to be pollinating and putting in the most of our yield differential here over portions of the Midwest. So the drought risk isn't gone by any means just because we have those warmer temperatures in the Northeast Pacific, but it is quelled a bit given that we're at this point in the year, we're looking for it, and it's not there yet. Before I finish up here, I want to jump over and look at the European drought conversation. This has been picking up, unfortunately, in recent weeks. They've seen a very dry spring. Areas of southern Europe, whether it be Spain, France, portions of Italy, particularly northern Italy, we saw flooding here earlier this year. And so those drought conditions haven't been getting in as deeply into portions of France and Spain. But this area here has gone dry just in the last 30 to 45 days. In fact, France, since the flooding, has gone very dry. And that seems to be a common theme that we've seen in the atmosphere at times. But then Eastern Europe, showing up dry as well this spring. Drought from the European Drought Observatory here showing drought warnings here over Eastern Europe, getting into the Central European area, the Rhine River Valley, portions of the Danube, certainly Southern Europe and portions of North Africa, seeing drought alerts out at this point. And if we just look at some of the rivers here across Europe where the drought hazard is very high, you can see the Rhine included in this, portions of Eastern Europe getting even over into Ukraine as well. This continues to be a story and is concerning because even if I just show you that same NMME, that's an acronym for you, for June, July, August, the same forecast I just showed you where it walked back some of the drought in the central U.S., it hasn't walked it back in Eastern Europe where some of that drought risk remains. So we're going to be watching this area closely, the breadbasket of Eurasia here, stretching over into parts of Ukraine, Eastern Europe, Western and Central Russia here, showing up drier for the summer forecast. We'll have to keep an eye on that as we go through the year. I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching today, and Eric will talk with you all on Friday morning.